All right, this is the fourth and final section for Unit 8, which is the 1920s and the 1930s. We'll continue on with the Great Depression, but now we're going to go where after Franklin Roosevelt was elected with his New Deal, the changes that will be done. Here's where again you see the different history standards. A lot of this is going to be the course of the New Deal. You see 511. There will be certain things for some of those programs that you need to know. I'll come back to some of the stuff for Florida also here. Bracketing dates, this is one that's obviously here. This is in between 29 and 41 with a stock market crash, but after the 1932 election here. All right, after FDR was elected, in the last section had mentioned about how in the last months of Hoover's presidency, and while Roosevelt was the president-elect, Hoover went to Roosevelt and asked him to help for things. The Great Depression was getting worse and worse. Banks crashing, businesses going under, unemployment was getting, every month was getting worse. At that time, the election was also in November like it is today, but it used to be the inauguration was in March. And Roosevelt, and this is one of the negatives of him, would see that he would not do anything to assist with this because he wanted the blame to all be on Hoover. So after that, we will change the Constitution, add the 20th Amendment, which will shorten the lame duck period. We will move the inauguration from March to January, where it's a lot shorter there, so it's not like this wouldn't happen again. Now, the first 100 days, a lot is going to happen. We usually have a little bit of a honeymoon period for presidents in the first 100 days. It didn't happen for Trump, not really happening for Biden in there, but this is where you got things that is kind of in the beginning. But this was major because things were so bad that pretty much anything was going to go. What FDR did is he had this brain trust that they got together, and he had with experts on whatever it was, banking, farming, business, industries that they had, and told them, come up with a plan. They would come up with a plan, make a name for it. This is where our acronym comes for our alphabet soup, where we had the alphabet soup quiz before this, and I'll come back to those in here. And then they are program after program. If it didn't work, just start over, have another one in there. The biggest crisis I had to deal with was the banking crisis, which earlier I had told you about how they closed down all the banks with the banking holiday, and we'll come back to this. Also this time, it had started before this, but then this we will have early on, the 21st Amendment is passed, which will then make it where alcohol is no longer illegal. This was a double good thing for the federal government because they did not have to spend money on enforcement, and now they have money for coming in on taxes, and that'll help pay for some of these programs. Although it's not enough, we're going to end up having to do something else with this. Okay, again, the Brain Trust is this group of people that for each of the things that we had. This is a political cartoon that a little bit earlier in here, but I have this where we have our doc analysis that you're doing for the 1930s. And you see here, again, always look and see what are the writings for various things. You notice the person in the middle is FDR. You should recognize him, but if not, you see on his hat it says FDR. Beside him, the nice nurse with a beard, but this is where the mild, meek as Congress. On his bag it says New Deal remedies, and of course we may have to change the remedies if we don't get results. Meanwhile, you look at the main subject, that is Uncle Sam, who is sick. Now on the table you see all of those things and a lot of the acronyms that you had on your alphabet soup quiz, and a lot of them that we didn't. That's why I said we didn't have all those. But this is where, if you're sick, you try something there, it doesn't work, try something new. And that was basically what happened in the New Deal, where it was just one thing after another. Again, the quiz that you had, those were some of the main ones. All right, everything that we're going over for the New Deal is basically the idea that they had was the three different levels: relief, recovery, reform. And then we're going to see for the different programs, whether it was relief, recovery, reform, or a mixture of it. Some of them were more so. I won't go real deep into here. If you were my AP class, I have a lot more on the alphabet soup quiz that they had to memorize, and I always have an essay where you would kind of take with the AAA and what part was relief, what part was recovery, what's a reform that they are doing. Now, the relief was to take care of the immediate problems that we have. All right, people that need food, where we have again the banks that are closing. The recovery, what was a way to fix it here so that we can get back on track. The reform, this is the part where we're looking to see, can we do something to make sure this doesn't happen again, or at least try not to make it here. Early on, the focus is on relief. One thing that's not in your alphabet soup quiz, but the Federal Emergency Relief Act was obviously with relief. And what they will do is they will look and see what already is going. And one thing that FDR's administration did, they bypassed the states. So they would look, and like here in Inverness, during our pandemic, the Church Without Walls has done a great job of helping for people that are food needy. So they saw a program like that that's good on the local level. Instead of creating something new in Washington, D.C. or sending money to Tallahassee, they send it directly to that organization so they can just expand what they're already doing and help them out. The bank holiday, we will shut down all the banks. They will be reviewed and they're to see whether or not if they were financially stable. If they weren't, they were not allowed to be open back up until then, and this is where the Emergency Banking Act helped to prop something up. This is where those alphabet soup programs start early on. Now, we're going to have two groups that don't agree with this, and actually history has repeated itself over and over again. In the past, Obamacare was an example of something where we're going to have both conservative critics, and then we're also going to have liberal critics. And the arguments are going to be much the same. For conservative critics, we're going to have people that say that's too much power to the federal government there. Or another major argument was you're spending too much government money that we don't have. The national debt's getting too large. We'll have a group in the 1930s that say this is taking away our freedom, the American Liberty League. So where you see liberty out there. This is kind of like with Obamacare, where we had the Tea Party that emerged in the 2010, 2011 reaction to Obamacare. During the COVID pandemic, where we have groups that say the government's too powerful, we should not be allowing this should be more state and local. So that's where the conservative sides that say a lot of these New Deal programs were. On the other side, we had the liberals. They felt that it didn't do enough. Again, using Obamacare as an example. For Obamacare, it combined some of the old system that we had with the insurance companies with expanding government health care. But liberals did not think Obamacare went far enough, and they wanted to get rid of the whole insurance side and go completely with a government health care like what most European countries have, or Canada. There. So this is where some people, and two that you need to be familiar with, Father Coughlin and Huey Long were two people that originally supported FDR, but then they felt that no, it wasn't going far enough. So FDR has critics both from the right and the left on the political spectrum. Now, Father Coughlin, he's a radio star, and when I say a radio star, he had the largest audience in radio history until Rush Limbaugh beat it in the 1990s. But Rush Limbaugh has never come close to his market share, which in media is actually the more important thing that you have. Coughlin also was a person that was very much against Jews, and this is where kind of makes some similarities for the United States and Germany, and then how we are a little bit different from them, because he will be blaming a lot of things on the Great Depression on the Jewish people. So where Germany has that going on also, but this is where some of the blame was. Huey Long will have a share the wealth plan. It's not true communism, but it's sort of along the way. Now the share wealth plan was that the government would send everybody a guaranteed salary. And how are you going to get that money? Well, after you make $1 million, you can't make any more that you get to keep. There, all the rest of it goes to the federal government. All the money from the rich are going to be put together, and then they're going to send checks out to everybody. It's a populist type plan that we have. We had sort of that happening with the pandemic, where both President Trump and President Biden were pushing for a bigger stimulus check that was sent out to taxpayers there. All right, this is the part that you'll go really deep into when you get to economics. I believe there's an entire chapter in our section of economics, of Keynesian economics. Now, the idea of Keynesian economics is you go into debt for a crisis. Historically, that had been done when you think of it like a time of war. But this is the case that FDR will be different, because he will say the Great Depression is a time of crisis, and so the nation needs to go into debt. The idea behind Keynesian economics is when you're in a crisis, you go into debt, and then when things are good, you pay off that debt. We have a whole lot of problems here in the last last 15, 20 years when it comes to things, because we have not gone with the paying off the debt for a long time. Now, the priming the pump, this is something that most of you are not familiar with. It's an old-timey saying, I guess you'll say in here, but when the old hand pumps that you had, you would have a bucket of water. And what happened was, in order to get the suction to work with it, you would have to pour a little bit of water to get it started there. And once you poured a little bit of water, you would get the suction, and then it would work and you could pump up other water. So that's the idea of Keynesian economics, though. You add a little bit of money into the economy, and then that'll get the economy going, and from there it'll work. A major criticism of FDR is the fact that he tried to, what is called the court packing plan, but he tried to change the way the Supreme Court was. Now, real quick for Supreme Court, in order to be a Supreme Court justice, you have to be a U.S. citizen, appointed by the President, and confirmed by the Senate. That's it. The Constitution does not give a whole lot. They do not tell how many Supreme Court members there are. And there we have to, it's been changed over time. Now since 1868, it has been 9. But FDR wanted to add some because the Supreme Court is going to go and rule some of his New Deal programs unconstitutional. So, in what is officially known as the Judicial Reorganization Act, but better known as the Court Packing Plan, FDR wanted to have it where first they were going to put a retirement age that would make some of the Supreme Court justices retire, and then they were going to add 6 and move the court from 9 to 16 there. Those justices, the new ones, would be appointed by FDR, and he's hoping that they would be a lot more friendly to him. We hear talk of that right now, and of things for some Democrats that are kind of looking and exploring whether we will do this in the time period here. Here is a time that the Supreme Court or the Congress finally told FDR no. And what will end up happening, though, the Supreme Court won't be packed, but it'll end up making it where they're a little bit more kind to them. Now, you'll notice a lot of different cartoons. You see the old 9. You see in there where it's yes, yes, we all vote yes, where on those puppets that FDR is holding, it says packed court. You see FDR, constitutional government, and then dictatorship, and a pendulum, and FDR is getting ready to cut it. A lot of cartoons that you can have that are about this. Here's one for about the New Deal overall. If you remember the Trojan horse story, in this case it's the Trojan donkey. The donkey representing the Democratic Party, and you see on the side the New Deal tyranny. And instead of going into Troy with the Greeks, this is where the Democrats and New Deal were going to go in and break up the Constitution from the inside. This cartoon, you see the sailor has FDR in his hat, and he says, that compass doesn't point the way that I want it to go, change it now. You have to read on the compass, it says Supreme Court 6 here. And you notice they're a little bit different from that earlier cartoon that we had. Congress this time isn't meek and mild, but they're really scared about this. And again, they didn't vote for this. This one's really small, but it's kind of like that early cartoon with all the medicines, and this is where FDR said you wanted action, and he's throwing all kinds of different programs at Uncle Sam. This is where kind of showing, and one thing that the court packing plan showed here is that we do have a system of checks and balances, and to try to make sure that not one side gets too powerful. And that's what our framers made in the Constitution. So you see legislative, executive branch, the judicial's facing the other way, and FDR is yelling for them to fall in, but they weren't. This is one of the examples I was saying that was kind of the difference between the United States and Germany, because during the Great Depression, FDR did gain a lot of power. Early on, Hitler in Germany, after he was elected originally, he will be given more and more power, and ultimately their Congress would give him everything. And that doesn't happen for FDR. And that's where, like I said, there are some similarities for what's happening in the United States, for what's happening in Germany, but that is one way that we take a different side. So Hitler gains more power, but there are limits to the power that's done for FDR. All right, for starting for some of these programs, this is where, when I had the Alphabet Soup quiz, that I had that you memorize it. We're not going real in depth on it in here in the notes, but these are the ones, any of them that are in the notes are ones that you definitely need to be familiar with. The names usually give it away for what they're about, but not always. The AAA is the Agriculture Adjustment Administration. So, agriculture, what this is dealing with, yes, you guessed it, farmers. A major problem we had is with the farmers that were going under and we're being foreclosed. We had an overproduction there where the modernization after World War I, and then we no longer had the demand coming from Europe. So what does it do? There was a bunch of different things that happened with this. This was controversial in the beginning because farmers were actually paid to lower their crops there. So you might be a farmer and you have 100 acres of corn there, and what the government did is they came in and said, if you plow under 25 acres of your corn, we'll pay you this amount of money, which that's the relief side. Okay, well here's some cash for you. You need money? Here you go. But the recovery side of this was they wanted to go and make sure that long term we were not producing too much. When you limit the supply, we will have what in economics is called artificial scarcity there. So the prices will actually go up for the farmers that way. Again, a lot of people criticize that, but it did actually help save the farms. Now, the long-term side of this, because it was declared unconstitutional in 1936, but they were able to rewrite the law and say that they were conserving soil, so that way farmers, the reason why government was able to force them. But one of the long-term things is this would also, some of the things in the Soil Conservation Act and the AAA ideas that they'll have will actually go and they will target areas that maybe shouldn't have been farmed as much, which a lot of that area was area that caused a dust storm. So they shut down some of the areas, and that would be something that will be a long-term effect there, and that's the reform side of this. All right, REA, Rural Electrification Administration. What is that one for? Well, that might be pretty simple. In the rural areas, bringing electricity. Here's the thing that we had. By the 1930s, urban areas had electricity strung all over. But the further you were from a town or a city, the less likely you were. So like here in Inverness, if you were living here in town, you had electricity and would have had it maybe for 15, 20, maybe even up to 25, 30 years even there, and a lot of the towns like this area of Florida. But just 5, 10, 15 miles down the road, where Pleasant Grove Road is, it used to be where you go about 10 miles down there was about 15, 20 houses there. But there was no company that wanted to spend the amount of money for the infrastructure to put all those telephone poles up and the wires to go out there. They would not make enough money to send the electricity out. So here's people living not too far from town, but they still don't have electricity because they live too far away. Well, what this did is the government would actually then help pay for that infrastructure to be put in there. And then once the lines went out there, the electric companies did not mind selling the electricity and then doing the upkeep after that. So this actually took care of a major problem that we had, and that's where it's actually for reform that you have. But it also is providing jobs then and helping the electric companies go, and that's kind of the area that we have for our recovery. All right, for banking, this is where I definitely break apart for the relief recovery. Again, the banking holiday, this is where they were shut down until they were showed they were strong enough. We will have the recovery, which this is where we will have the Glass-Steagall Act that is passed, that will go give different regulations and help, and then we'll create the FDIC. Now the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, is one that it is deposit insurance. If you put your money in the bank up to like $250,000 today there, if the bank went under, your money was safe. Okay, it was insured by the federal government. So as long as the federal government was there, that way they didn't have people panicking, thinking that their bank was going to go under, which would then, if everybody went to it, may cause it. All right, the CCC is one of the most successful New Deal programs that we have. By the way, the FDIC is still around today. That the CCC was something that took care of a major problem that we had. A lot of the unemployed people were young men, teenage, early 20s men. And as you all can imagine, you get a bunch of teenage boys and they have nothing to do. They're a lot more likely to get in trouble here. So what this set up is basically young men were able to work, and it was not the military, but it was sort of like the military. You will have it where they're given uniforms, they're given houses there, they have food, they got a small salary there. And what they would end up doing is different programs of getting things that, well, you just need some muscle to do it. I'd say like an example for this area is we need fire lanes that are in the Withlacoochee State Forest, where you just have to go through and cut down and make sure branches aren't in certain areas. So if the forest fire occurs, it makes a fire break for it there. So what's better than to get a bunch of teenage and early 20 boys to go out there and do that physical work, or at Whispering Pines where they have the trails to make those trails or to build some simple things in here. One of the major things they did, and this is where you'll see a lot of stuff with trees there for the CCC. You think that after all this time we had where we had cut down the forest, but we normally didn't replant them. So we had a lot of areas that if the forest wasn't made to farmland, it never really grew back the way it should. So decades and decades of that, we will end up going, and a lot of these young men will go and replant the forest throughout America. This is something that we see that, I mean, almost a century later, where especially in the South, a lot of the pine forests that we have here. Again, this was one of the most successful programs because it put people at work, got men off the street here. And again, where you see in this question, we're even talking about reforesting America. You have here in Florida, outside of Sebring, there's actually a park at part of Highlands Hammock State Park, where they have a museum for the CCC, and tell about it. All right, two successful programs that are around today, and what's sometimes is seen as like the ultimate program is the TVA, or the Tennessee Valley Authority. This takes care of a whole lot of things. Now, the Tennessee Valley, if you see this map, actually is a bunch of states in the South, not just Tennessee. It actually even includes a little bit here in Florida, in the panhandle of the area where Lake Seminole is, north of Tallahassee. But a major problem that you had throughout the South was the fact that you have a lot of rivers, and every few years you would have flood problems. So how do you take care of flood problems? You have to build dams. Well, another problem you had in the South was the fact that some of the poorest area in the nation was in the deep South there and around the Appalachian Mountains. So they did not have electricity there. So when they built these dams, they built them to be hydroelectric dams. So you take care of the flood control. It also gave it where there was cheap electricity for the rural area, bring it to there. So it's kind of like the rural electrification there. Building these dams will provide jobs for people throughout the South where they have it. And today, still, TVA is still around. I go whitewater rafting in North Carolina and Tennessee, like the Ocoee or the Nottahala rivers, that are actually TVA dams. Some of the best fishing lakes in America are some of these lakes that are from these dams. So again, today it still provides electricity. It's still used for basically, again, for rafting and fishing and outdoor entertainment. All right, Social Security insurance, SSI. Earlier in history, Dr. Francis Townsend had what he called the old age pension system. I don't remember the exact story, but I kind of take it on my own that what happened was he had seen a person digging through his garbage or something like that, and he was going to go yell at the guy, and he realized it was someone that he'd seen grow up. And what had happened was he was a man, and I'll say that's someone that was like a mechanic. Worked a good, honest job his whole life, but when he got older, arthritis and things made it where he could no longer work. Never was able to really save up there, and then when he got older, if you didn't have your children take care of you or something, then you just were on your own. So Dr. Townsend had the idea of what was called an old age pension. You have a tax that is taken out while you're working, and then you will get a pension when you will get older there, and the government would run it there. And FDR will basically take that idea, and that was what will become Social Security there. It was very successful there because before we had Social Security, the highest group that lived in poverty was elderly people, and that will change. Now, Social Security does not give you a lot of money. In fact, for a monthly check, it will basically get just above the poverty line. So if an older person is living just on Social Security, they're not in poverty, but they're right above it here. So it did help. At that time, for the relief side, well, older people suddenly got more money. They were able then to use it to spend and help with the economy. By the way, we had the question, what group is it today? So the The group that is actually the most likely to be in poverty, or the highest percentage of poverty today, is actually single mothers. That is a group. So that's where, when you target and say, well, how can we take care of this problem? That's where a problem we have in America today will be that. All right, the NRA, not the National Rifle Association, National Recovery Administration. Here, I actually combined. There was an NIRA also, but here's for the recovery industry. The idea that it was to help industries. This will be one of the cases like AAA that will end up being declared unconstitutional. They'll have to rewrite the law for a lot of things here. But what this was to try to set up and make various things to help industries there. One of the things that it did was a minimum wage, and this is where the idea of minimum wage comes about in America. We will have later on the Wagner Act, which will set up the National Labor Relations Board there with the National Labor Relations Act. And this will actually be one of the biggest things for helping unions. It will make it where collective bargaining is allowed. That is where with the unions, which is the idea for the unions, they collective together, they are negotiating, bargaining there, and it made sure that wasn't illegal. Today, the National Labor Relations Board is still a government agency that is helping out to make sure that people working different industries are not abused with what they have, safety things as well as things with pay. All right, this next thing is a bunch of things, all right, and this is where like two of them that were on your alphabet soup quiz with the Civil Works Administration, the Public Works Administration, there's also the Work Progress Administration. So all of these different works, so no works. What this is that we will end up putting people to work on works. So what are works? These are government projects for something that is needed. Again, Hoover will start this idea with the Boulder Dam, but here locally we will have, like, let's say that on the Withlacoochee River that we obviously right now we need a new bridge to be built on Highway 200 going to Ocala. Well, it needs to be built. During the Great Depression we had a lot of people without jobs, so they were able to then go and put those people to work, buy the things they needed, and build the bridge that needed to be built. In Dunellen, they built an auditorium. Some places built bandstands, and so that's why they will have a lot of these things. Also in this, we're going to have the Federal Arts Project. So this is where, you may not be a construction worker, but maybe you are a person that was a painter. So we will have that murals that are painted in places, or they will have a group of actors and actresses that they will be paid to actually put on a play, and then people could go to it for free here. This is one of the things that was kind of seen as very successful, again, putting people to work, getting some things done on the infrastructure for what we had. But this is also where a lot of that money had to come from, the Keynesian economics, and borrow from it. Here's where for Florida, like this is where the Key West Aquarium, if you're ever there, that was one thing that was built by that. All right, the SEC, all right, not the Southeastern Conference, Security and Exchange Commission. This is definitely for the reform side of this that it goes. What happened was they wanted to make sure that companies were not cooking the books. So if people were investing in stocks, to make sure that they weren't lying to it. So the Security Exchange Commission is basically it's like a policing regulations that you have to make sure for the stock markets to help investors. Yes, we'll still have drops in the stock market, but that most of this is usually done for more corrections and all in the economic cycle. So, all right, a hodgepodge of things here at the end. One thing is some women that you do need to know. This is more than just trivia, but this is where the first cabinet woman ever was Frances Perkins. Not only was she the first, I believe, in the history of the United States, she was the longest serving Secretary of Labor that we have. So Franklin Roosevelt will be the first to have a woman cabinet member. Mary McLeod Bethune was part of the Black Cabinet. Now the Black Cabinet was a group of advisors that FDR brought in to tell him about race relations. What's really significant about this for the Black Cabinet is African Americans up to this time period had, since the Civil War, always voted with Republicans, the party of Lincoln, the party that ended slavery. But for the last half century, Republicans really had done nothing to help for African Americans. Meanwhile, Roosevelt's a Democrat, and he's doing things for people that is a voting bloc that normally doesn't vote for him. So between him and then after that Truman, we will have a huge shift as African Americans will shift from voting predominantly for Republicans to now today voting predominantly for Democrats. Now for Mary McLeod Bethune, she is from the state of Florida. She had started a school in Daytona Beach, which now that school has emerged and is part of Bethune-Cookman College over in Daytona Beach. That's a Floridian that was part of the black cabinet that we have. All right, FDR wins his third election, or second election in 1936. He'll win a third election in 1940. He'll win a fourth election in 44. We'll have later on at the 22nd Amendment to do that. But in 36, he runs, and you look at that map, you see only Vermont and Maine are the only red states that are there. So, did people as a whole support what FDR was doing in the New Deal? Yes, they did in here. But what will it be is this is where what's the focus supposed to be? Well, FDR wants to go even bigger. And again, the same complaints by conservatives and liberals that you have. But liberals were happy that he was wanting to go bigger in a second New Deal. We will soon after have a recession where things have been getting better, but still we weren't out of the Great Depression, but things have gotten better for several years. We will have it then a little slip up in a recession. Now, this recession is where the two political parties had said for the different things. Democrats said we need to do more. We need to actually put more money, stimulate it. We're almost there. It's kind of like you were sick, you were getting better, but then you had a little setback on it. Well, you just need one more batch of antibiotics. Republicans said no, we're doing something. We need to go and let the economy finish out on there. The part that we had was more false. We need to have it for real here. And again, when I started this section there in class, I was talking about how for FDR, for the New Deal the question of whether the New Deal got us out of the Great Depression or not, that one is not something that's really asked, because it doesn't. The bigger question is how much did it help us there? Because the New Deal definitely helped, but to how much? Because what truly got us out of the Great Depression, which when I started with this, it'll be World War II. That is when people get back to work. But how much did all these things go and help? I mean, would the economy have gotten better from 1933 through 37 and then 38 and 39 if it wasn't for the New Deal programs? We don't know, and again, we don't know the effects of it, and that's kind of the argument politically over time. This is kind of a summary of a bunch of things that you'll see in your reading, but this is where the long-term effects of this. A lot of these improvements were done in the South and the West, especially the South. The South, since the Civil War, had pretty much been ignored. While the North had all the industry and had expanded, most of the South, not really Florida too much, but most of the South pretty much hadn't changed a whole lot. Again, they were the furthest behind when it came to things for industry, agriculture, electricity. The West also had some areas. So what ended up happening is a lot of these improvements helped the South. The TVA, the REA, those type of things really helped with the South. All these work programs that we had. Social Security is a long-term effect. It is still seen as one of the most popular government programs we have. There's a whole lot of flaws, and your generation definitely should be worried about some of the flaws that we have in it, because you may end up paying for it. But overall, the idea definitely worked at that time to get the elderly to not be the most represented group in poverty. But this is where we will help. Other reforms like the FDIC, the SEC, and the National Labor Relations Board, all of these things that are still around today, that were some of the long-term reforms. Keynesian economics, whether for both the good and the bad, that idea is here. The growth of the federal government, and the federal government grew immensely with the New Deal for the power. And then we're going to put on top of this World War II, which is going to do even more. And then there's going to be a shift of groups and voting trends. African Americans are going to shift from the Republicans to the Democrats. We're going to have basically your blue collar workers that are going to shift some from the Republicans to being Roosevelt Democrats for several decades in that way. All right, you see with this graph, again, this is where for the GDP, this is where we have that slight recession. Again, things have been getting better after going downhill, getting better. We have this, but then spike up, and then it really goes after World War II. For this political cartoon, it's like boo-hoo-hoo, the New Deal's ruined the economy. But it was, again, the rich. They had to pay higher taxes, but that was kind of the argument for, was it the rich or not? Little meme for you, war, what's it good for? Well, it's good for the Great Depression, get you out of the Great Depression. This is one of the murals, is like for that art project in here, and it's both kind of, you see some good and the bad, because this is where a lot of people kind of looked at, oh, well, Franklin Roosevelt's the savior, because again, you see how he's the only person of strength and everybody else is distressed in here. But this is also where people kind of look and see where Roosevelt was a person that came and helped the working man. And New Deal programs, they were not usually, they were something that usually wasn't divided by race. That's again why African Americans will go with them. Mr. Beth. All right, for Florida. And before we were in the Great Depression, after the 1926 land bust that we have and the hurricanes that will go, things just keep getting worse in the 1930s. We will have more and more banks fail. The highest number will be 113 in 1932. So what started in 1926 will continue on. The two biggest railroads will end up going into debt in there, and pretty much what today will be called filing for some bankruptcy ideas. Agriculture is hit hard. The tourist industry really hit hard. There, agriculture, we have the Mediterranean fruit fly that hit Florida. We will have the Texas tick, so citrus and cattle will be in there. One of the things that I have in here, WDAE, which if you listen to sports radio, it's a sports talk station that we can get in this area from Tampa, but the very first radio station. They used to say they were for wonderful days and evenings, but they said that their call letters actually stand for "we don't always eat" out there. For voting for the governor, we're going to end up having, even though he's not FDR, he's a lot like FDR in what he will do with David Schultz there, and we'll do a lot of the same. The New Deal will put a lot of money into Florida. The CCC will give over 40,000 Floridians jobs here for young men. Florida will be a massive place for a lot of forests that are planted. That's why we have that museum down in Sebring in there. We're going to have a lot of other work projects in here, and this is where kind of the things pick up. Our tourist industry was a little bit slow for picking up, but a lot of it kind of started with, again, our people and campers, our tin can tourists, and then people coming to the ocean. There, we actually started, we're recovering a little fast. So we went into the Great Depression faster, but we started to come in. Some Floridians that you need to know from this time period. Marjorie Keenan Rollins was a writer who wrote about from early in this time period, later on. We have a museum nearby, not too far outside of Gainesville there, where she wrote The Yearling and the Cross Creek. You can actually, for our extra credit movies, watch Cross Creek or The Yearling. Zora Neale Hurston, we had her before for a Harlem Renaissance writer, but she's one this time. Mary McLeod Bethune in the Black Cabinet that we had a little bit earlier, and not only advising FDR, but she was actually a close friend for Eleanor Roosevelt, and we'll give a lot of advice to Eleanor Roosevelt. So.